I should have known the dinner was a trap. My sister, Sierra, picked the place. La Villetta, famous for its lobster ravioli and $30 appetizers. She sat across from me, a smug little smile playing on her lips as she adjusted her new watch under the dim chandelier light. It was a gift to herself, she'd announced, for landing the regional manager position. My mom raised her wine glass, her eyes gleaming with pride. To Sierra, she said, her voice loud enough for the tables nearby to hear, proving yet again that hard work pays off. Her eyes flicked to me. The message was loud and clear. As a graphic designer for a small firm, I was stable. I was creative. But in my mother's world, I was a permanent resident of the minor leagues. Sierra was the all-star, and Mom was her biggest fan. I tried to steer the conversation to neutral ground. The designs for the new city library project are coming along. It's been challenging but rewarding. Mom waved a dismissive hand, already turning back to Sierra. That's nice, honey. But Sierra is flying to corporate in Dallas next month. Dallas. She said the word like it was a kingdom. Sierra just smiled that tight, practiced smile. It's a lot of pressure, but someone has to step up. She looked right at me. Don't worry, I'll still remember the little people. I felt the familiar heat rise in my cheeks. My dad said nothing. He just kept his eyes on his plate, meticulously cutting his chicken parmesan into perfect, even squares. He was a master of strategic silence. The final blow came when I mentioned my landlord was selling my building. I told them I might have to find a new apartment soon, and the market was brutal. Mom scoffed. It was a loud, ugly sound. The couple at the next table glanced over. Always some drama with you, Mom said, her voice laced with a thick theatrical pity. You know, if you'd been more ambitious, more like your sister, you wouldn't have these problems. I just stared at my wine glass. It's just bad timing, Mom. Then her voice cut through the restaurant's murmur, sharp and loud enough to kill a conversation 3 tables away. You're bitter because Sierra made IT big. Everything stopped. The clinking of forks, the low chatter, my own breath, caught in my throat. My dad froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. Sierra just watched me, a cruel, triumphant glint in her eye. She was enjoying this. I looked up from my glass. My heart was a drum against my ribs, but my voice, when it came out, was chillingly calm. It didn't even feel like my own. Then why not tell her to return the $61,000 I've been giving you since my college days? A new kind of silence fell, heavy, suffocating. Mom's jaw hung open, the color draining from her face. Sierra's smugness dissolved into a mask of pure confusion. But it was my dad's reaction that I'll never forget. He didn't look at my mom. He didn't look at Sierra. He didn't even look at me. He just stared down at his half-eaten chicken, his hand frozen in midair. And he suddenly went silent. A complete, hollow, terrified silence that told me everything I needed to know. The drive home from the restaurant was a blur. The silence in that car was a living thing, louder and more accusing than my mother's yelling had ever been. Back in my apartment, the quiet was a relief. I sank onto my sofa, the scene replaying in my head. The gasp from the next table. The shock on Sierra's face. My father's bowed head. The $61,000. It wasn't a number I'd pulled from thin air. My mind drifted back to my sophomore year of college. A frantic call from Mom. The transmission on the car was shot. They couldn't afford the repair. Could I help? Just this once? I'd sent them $800 from my student loan refund, the money I had earmarked for a new laptop. I spent the rest of the semester in the freezing library computer lab, writing essays until 2 in the morning. It was never just once. A few years later, it was Dad's dental implant. A leaky roof that seemed to happen every other spring. Credit card debt that needed to be cleared up before the interest gets crazy. Each request was an emergency, wrapped in panic and promises I knew were empty. I walked over to my bookshelf and pulled out an old, worn ledger. I'd started it as a joke back then, a way to track the loans I knew I'd never see again. I flipped through the pages, my own history written in blue ink. $800. Car transmission. $1,500. Dad's dental emergency. $4,250. Amex bill. Page after page of my own security siphoned away. The grand total on the last page stared back at me. $61,427.50. I opened my laptop, hoping to lose myself in work. But an unread email from my property manager caught my eye. The subject line was lease renewal and rate adjustment. My heart went cold. I clicked it open and read the first line. Due to rising property taxes and market adjustments, your new monthly rent will be... It was a 30% increase, effective in 60 days. I stared at the number on the screen. It was impossibly high. All I could think about was the money in that ledger. The down payment I never saved. The investments I never made. The stability I had handed over piece by piece to a family that saw me as a bitter failure. My phone buzzed on the table, loud in the silent apartment. A text from Mom. You embarrassed this entire family tonight. You owe your sister an apology. I looked at the rent increase notice. Then I looked at the text. An apology? She had to be kidding me. I ignored Mom's text. And the one after that. I tried to focus on the library designs on my monitor, the clean lines, and logical spaces, a welcome escape from the mess of my family. An hour later, my phone rang. Her name flashed on the screen. My heart hammered against my ribs. A part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail, to hide like I always did. But something had shifted in me at that restaurant. I took a deep breath, the air feeling thin and sharp in my lungs. I answered, "Did you get my texts?" She snapped. There was no hello, just the clipped, angry edge of her voice. "I did, and..." She demanded. "I'm waiting. The right thing to do is to call your sister and beg for her forgiveness." My eyes traced the blueprint of the library's main atrium. A world that made sense. I wasn't the one who raised my voice in the middle of a crowded restaurant, Mom. A sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Oh, so this is my fault now?" She shrieked, her voice rising with practiced indignation. "This is the thanks I get, after everything we've done for you, all the sacrifices we made? I have never in my entire life met a more ungrateful child." There it was, the word, her silver bullet. The one she always used to make me crumble, to make me apologize for things I didn't do, just to make the yelling stop. Usually, it worked. But this time, I felt a strange, hollow calm. A profound emptiness where the guilt used to be. I let her rant. I listened to her talk about my jealousy, my terrible attitude, how I was tearing the family apart with my selfishness. I let her words, each one designed to wound me, fall into a silent void. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend myself. I just let her burn herself out. When she finally paused to take a breath, expecting me to be sobbing, to be begging for forgiveness, I spoke. No, the line went dead quiet. "What?" she whispered, the venom in her voice making the single word a threat. "What did you just say to me?" "No," I repeated, and my voice was stronger this time, forged in the fire of her anger. "I will not be apologizing for anything. I will not be spoken to like that again. And just so we are perfectly clear, the bank of me is officially closed. Permanently." The silence on the other end was so absolute I thought she might have hung up. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, the disbelief warring with her fury. Then, a choked sound. A gasp of pure rage. "You'll regret this," she hissed. And the line went dead. I hung up, my hand trembling slightly. Not from fear. It was adrenaline. The wild, dizzying rush of someone who had just walked through fire and come out the other side. I had done it. I had finally said it. My phone buzzed again. I flinched, my body tensing for another attack, but it wasn't her. It was a text from a number I hadn't seen in years. My Uncle David. My dad's younger brother. The message was short, but it felt like a lifeline. "Heard what happened from Aunt Carol. About time someone said it. You okay? A single tear, hot and unexpected, rolled down my cheek. I wasn't entirely alone in this fight after all. The next morning, my phone began to buzz incessantly. It didn't stop. A torrent of notifications from the Miller Family Fun Group text. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew what this was. This was my mother's courtroom, and she was the judge, jury, and executioner. I opened the app. A wall of text from her dominated the screen. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, crafted to make her the martyr and me the monster. "We are just heartbroken by her behavior," she wrote. "We've always tried to give both our girls everything, but her bitterness towards Sierra's success has turned her into a stranger. Now she's threatening to cut us off completely. Right when your father's health has been so fragile, we are devastated." The lies were breathtaking. My father was healthier than I was. The replies poured in instantly, a cascade of blind support. "Aunt Carol, that's just awful. I'm so sorry you're dealing with this. Sending you love. My cousin Jenna. Some people are so ungrateful. Family should always come first. Another aunt, she'll come around. She's just being dramatic." I scrolled through the messages, a sick feeling growing in my stomach. I was looking for just one person to ask my side of the story, just one person to question the narrative. But there was no one. I had been tried and convicted in the court of family opinion. They saw the story my mother had crafted, the benevolent parents and the cold, cruel daughter, and they accepted it without a single question. For a moment, the old shame washed over me. The urge to defend myself, to type out a frantic, desperate explanation, was overwhelming. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard. But then I thought of the rent increase. I thought of the years of quiet sacrifice. I didn't type a single word. Instead, I pressed the mute button. The notification stopped. The silence was a relief. Then, I walked over to my bookshelf, pulled out the spiral-bound ledger, and sat down at my desk. I opened it to the first page. With a red pen, I began to make notes in the margins, highlighting dates and cross-referencing them with my online banking history. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was building a case. My phone buzzed with a private message. I flinched, but it wasn't from the group chat. It was Uncle David. "Don't rise to the bait. Your grandmother's estate lawyer just called a family meeting for next Saturday. He wants everyone there. Something's up." The week leading up to the family meeting wasn't about anger. It was about ammunition. After work each day, I didn't go home. I went to the sterile, brightly lit print shop downtown. For 5 nights in a row, I sat at a computer, logging into my bank account and printing years of financial statements. The whir of the printer was the only sound. I highlighted every single transfer to my parents' joint account. The dates lined up perfectly with the entries in my ledger. The stack of paper grew. It felt heavy in my hands. It was the physical weight of my silence, of every emergency and every broken promise. By Thursday, I had it all organized in a thick manila folder. The final tally was right there in black and white, $61,427.50. On Friday, my boss, Mr. Henderson, called me into his office. He had my preliminary designs for the civic library spread across his desk. My blueprints. My future. "This is exceptional work," he said, his voice serious. "The board is impressed. They want to see a full presentation at the end of the month." He paused, looking at me over his glasses. "If this goes well, this is your promotion to lead designer." A surge of validation shot through me, so pure and bright it almost hurt. This was what I had been working for. It was everything, and I knew, in that moment, that I couldn't walk into that presentation with the weight of my family's drama still on my shoulders. This had to end. That afternoon, I met Uncle David at a small coffee shop across town. The air smelled like burnt coffee and conspiracy. I didn't say a word. I just slid the manila folder across the table. He opened it. His eyes widened as he flipped through the pages, a low whistle escaping his lips. "Good Lord," he muttered. I knew it was bad, but I didn't know it was this bad. He confirmed my suspicions. The Saturday meeting was about selling my late grandmother's house. He'd overheard my mother and Sierra whispering about using the inheritance to fund Sierra's new consulting business, a business I knew nothing about. "Your dad knows," David said, his gaze steady and kind. "He's ashamed. He's a good man, but he's weak when it comes to your mother." "But facts." He tapped the thick folder. "Facts are hard to argue with. I'll be there. I'll back you up." As I was leaving the coffee shop, a metallic blue car pulled out of a priority parking spot. The sunlight glinted off the hood. It was a brand new BMW, sleek, expensive, and completely out of place on this quiet street. Behind the wheel, laughing into her phone without a care in the world, was Sierra. And suddenly, it all clicked into place. The frantic call from my mother a month ago. A massive leak in the roof. The desperate plea for $5,000 to cover the emergency repairs. My blood ran cold. It wasn't for a roof. It was for a down payment. The lawyer's office was cold. The air conditioning hummed, a sterile sound that did nothing to cut through the tension. We all sat around a polished mahogany table, a perfect veneer of civility stretched thin over years of resentment. Mom, Dad, Sierra, Uncle David, and a few other relatives. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Gable, cleared his throat and laid out the situation in dry, legal terms. My grandmother's house was sold. The proceeds, roughly $120,000, were to be split between her children, my father and my uncle. Before Mr. Gable could continue, my mother launched into a prepared speech. It was a masterclass in theatrics. She spoke of their recent financial hardships, a phrase that made my stomach clench. She mentioned my father's fragile health, and I saw my dad flinch. Then, she turned her attention to the money. "We think it would be wisest to invest the majority of Dad's share with Sierra," she announced to the room. "She has a real head for business, for making things grow." She cast a pitying glance in my direction, a little smirk playing on her lips. "Some of us," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "just aren't built for that kind of success." The room murmured in agreement. Sierra sat back in her chair, soaking it all in. This was her coronation. I waited for the murmurs to die down. I waited for the silence. Then, I reached into my bag and placed my old, spiral-bound ledger on the center of the table. The soft thud echoed in the quiet room. Every eye snapped to it. "Before we discuss distributing any new funds," I said, my voice perfectly, even and clear, "I believe we need to settle the family's existing debts." My mother stiffened. Her smile vanished. "What on earth are you talking about?" I opened the ledger to the final page, the ink clear and precise. "I'm talking about the $61,427.50 I have personally transferred to you and Dad since 2012 for a series of declared emergencies." I looked around the table, meeting every person's eye. "I would like to be reimbursed from your share of the estate." A ripple of shock went through the room. Sierra let out a sharp, disbelieving scoff. "You're delusional," she said, her voice laced with contempt. "You're making this up to get attention. Prove it." "Am I?" I met her gaze. Then I reached back into my bag, pulled out the thick manila folder, and slid it across the polished table towards Mr. Gable. "Then you should have no problem looking through these. They're the printed bank statements corresponding to every single entry in that ledger. Highlighted for your convenience." Mr. Gable picked up the folder. He pulled out the first few pages, his professional demeanor cracking as his eyebrows shot towards his hairline. He looked from the papers to my parents, then back again. He knew. My mother's face was a mask of pale fury. "This is a private family matter," she hissed. "It became a legal matter when you claimed financial hardship to get a larger share of an inheritance," I said, my voice like ice. Then, I turned my full attention to my sister. The final blow, like the final $5,000 transfer I made last month. Mom said it was for an emergency roof repair. I let the words hang in the air. "But that's funny. Because last week I saw you driving a brand new BMW. What a coincidence." Dead. Silence. The color drained from Sierra's face. Her smug confidence didn't just disappear, it shattered. She looked to my mother for help, for a denial, for anything. But Mom was just staring at Dad, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. And my father, who had been silent and invisible for weeks, finally looked up. He didn't look at his wife. He didn't look at his favorite daughter. He looked at me. His eyes were filled with a deep, bottomless shame. And in front of his brother, his family, and a lawyer, he gave a single, slow, deliberate nod. It was over. Uncle David put a hand on my shoulder, a silent, steady pressure. The weight on my own lifted. Mr. Gable cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. He looked directly at my parents, his voice all business once more. Well, this certainly changes the distribution calculations. 2 months later, I was unpacking the last box of books in my new apartment. It was smaller than my old place, but the afternoon sun poured through the windows, and I could afford it all on my own, with no anxiety, no dread. The estate lawyer had overseen the reimbursement directly from my parents' share of the inheritance. I didn't use the money for a fancy car or a vacation. I used it to pay the security deposit and 6 months' rent on this new, quiet life. I put the rest into a savings account. It was a safety net. My safety net. Pinned to a corkboard above my new desk were the final renderings for the Civic Library project. I'd presented them to the board 2 weeks ago. I got the promotion. I was now a lead designer. My life felt quiet. The constant, low-grade hum of stress I had lived with for years was finally gone. My phone rang. I smiled when I saw the caller ID. "Hey, Uncle David. Just confirming you're still on for Sunday dinner," he said, his voice warm. "Marge is making lasagna. I wouldn't miss it for the world," I said. That Sunday, I sat at their crowded, noisy dinner table, laughing. As my little cousin told me a rambling story about his soccer game, it was easy. It was genuine. This was family, not the one I was born into, but the one I was choosing. I still get texts from Mom sometimes, long, rambling messages that start as apologies, twist into accusations, and end as demands. I don't delete them, but I don't reply. Her power over me was tied to my bank account, and the account was closed. Sierra, I heard, had to sell the car. Looking back, cutting the financial cord was the easy part. The hardest part was grieving the family I thought I had. But it was the only way to find the person I was meant to be. Realizing I could build a life that supported me, instead of one I was constantly supporting, that was worth more than any $61,000. Have you ever been the secret safety net for your family? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below.